Welcome everyone to this week's edition of the Bombercast. I'm your regular co-host, TheGrizz, here together with your other regular co-host, Bonta34. Apologies if I'm a bit out of practice, and we apologize for the delay in podcasts. Although we sound awfully professional, sometimes life doesn't allow it. But Bonta, unfortunately, despite the fact we've been away for 3 weeks, we've got 0 wins from that last 3 weeks to talk about, including 2 days ago against Sydney. How are you, Bonts?
Yeah, it's been a disappointing few weeks to be an Essendon fan, if we're probably being honest. Another brave loss, which is pretty hollow, if I'm honest.
Mm.
I had a discussion with Owen87, not on the board but somewhere else, and he said, "Oh, at least we didn't get blown away." And I just said, "A loss is a loss." And him and I had a bit of a disagreement about that because he wanted to sort of take some positives, but I was pretty down the dumps afterwards because it just seems like a repetition of previous seasons a little bit in that we
Yeah.
get to a stage where we're competitive, and then we get a reality check, and then we get a couple of brave losses, and then we just sort of fade away. So,
Yeah.
but we'll talk about whether or not we're going to fade away later. Just yeah, it was pretty disappointing I thought on Saturday night that we sort of played for probably about a quarter, maybe a quarter and a half, and as a result, didn't get the chocolates.
Yep. I didn't take much positive out of the game. The last quarter was basically it when we got the game back on our terms. But it's interesting you say another brave loss. I don't feel like we've had a brave loss since the Adelaide win, to be honest. Like Geelong was horrendous. Bulldogs, I think the scoreline flattered us, even though we lost by 40 points. And then it's obviously this week, really, it was one good quarter of football. If we're being brutally honest, it was Sydney not be able to go with us on the clearances. But, the 2 points, not bad, I suppose, but there's no way we shouldn't have won this game. And I'm being really blunt with that. Like you look at the stat pro, and stats aren't everything, and we can talk about how the game's been played. But when I think it's like plus 23 in inside 50s and plus 22 in contested possessions, plus basically plus 13 in clearances, you should not be losing a game at Etihad Stadium or Marvel Stadium. Sorry, you should not lose that game. We had a 37% efficiency going inside 50. So for the people listening home, going, what the flip does that mean, Grizz? That means we were scoring every third time we went inside 50. Sydney scored better one in every two. So that's the difference in the game. Sydney were just way more efficient than we were on the outside. And I suppose when you play at Marvel, if you can't take advantage of your clearance work, then the ball just goes flying back the other way.
I mean, the other thing, obviously, that we have to keep in mind is, Sydney lost Buddy very, very early in the piece.
Mm.
So that completely stuffed their structure, losing Buddy so early. Although Marty did play well, but he's no Buddy Franklin, and Dane Rampy was on one leg for pretty much 2.5 quarters himself. So Sydney
Yeah.
weren't exactly at full tilt, which also I think just adds to the
Mm.
disappointment personally.
Yeah.
We also managed to play Jake Lloyd back into form without entry inside 50, as you sort of just pointed out then, because he had 31 touches against us. He was okay against Fremantle a week ago, but wasn't great. And that was when he was coming back from an injury. He got subbed out against Richmond because he was injured. His season's sort of been okay, but not great. And we made him look like the Jake Lloyd of 2019, 2018,
Yeah.
really, on Saturday night, which was incredibly disappointing because, as you said, going forward, we just weren't at all what you would call positive.
Mm.
And we just fluffed too many chances. And a big culprit, I think, and he wasn't solely responsible, but I think even though he kicked four, Peter Wright was a big culprit for us not capitalising on those
Yeah.
inside 50s because he had hands of cement on Saturday night.
Yeah, and to be honest, he kicked 50 goals for us last year, which is great effort, not doubting that. And I think he can be a wonderful complementary piece. But we seem obsessed with playing a second ruck to avoid him playing in the ruck. And I'm starting to think he's not your number one forward. He's your gun number two that every team needs. They can chop out in the ruck, and I think the thing that stops him from being that number one key forward player is he just can't, like you said, clunk marks under any sort of physical pressure in the air. Which, when you're 203 centimeters and you're 100 plus kegs, you have that has to be a one wood when you've got front position, and it's like he plays not knowing or expecting that there's going to be body contact. Like he must be the easiest player to play on in terms of just if you get any body spoil on him. And for people at home, when you say body spoils. Like when you don't even touch the ball with your fist, but you just jump into the back with your chest and put them off balance. He just doesn't seem to be able to hold anything. And it looks like he's getting infringed because he's pushed under the ball all the time, but he just doesn't have, I don't know if it's the core strength or the leg strength, I don't know what it is, to hold his position and to hold sort of his body balanced enough to clutch the ball. And, he kicked 4 and we're sitting here going, mate, he cost us the game. But it just goes to show the gap, I suppose, between what he is and what he could be. But at 26 years old, what are you expecting from him? But, his partner, well, not his partner in crime, I would argue the main kahuna up forward now, Cole Langford, 40 goals for the year. I would argue he's the biggest plus from this season. If you were to say what's the biggest positive out of this year, it would be Cole Langford, I think.
I just want to quickly touch on back to Peter Wright with his contested marking. So when he came to us from the Suns, and it wasn't really a strength of his. He was actually, but when he first came to us, he wasn't that bad. And last year was actually quite good. He averaged. I mean, it sounds silly to say he averaged 2 a game, but like he had improved in that area. And so when he was on with that. But this year he just seems to reverted back to his Gold Coast days, where, as you said, he can't take a mark under pressure, which is bitterly disappointing for us. But yeah, Langford's probably definitely been the most positive I think you could find for us this year. I think it was bumped one of his threads from about 2015. And to be honest, I think there's probably a dozen posters, 2 dozen posters who could do the same thing and bump a post from 2016 or 2017 or whatever it's saying, this bloke is a forward, why are we playing him as mid? This bloke is a forward, why are we playing him as mid? And all of a sudden you're playing forward. And the thing is, he's kicked 40 goals. He hasn't played forward all year. So that's the thing that I think, I get there was only probably maybe 2 or 3 games where he went down back.
Yeah.
But, if he played forward all year, that 40 goals suddenly looks, 50 goals. And you're starting to talk like the best season that Essendon forwards had since Matthew Lloyd type numbers, if he'd sort of been there the whole time. And look, I mean, what do we got? We got 4 games to go, and he's averaging 2 goals a game. So there's 50 goals are still on target. He'll still probably fall below what Peter Wright scored last year, which is also why I'm probably prepared to stand by Peter until the end of next year, in terms of number 1 being number 2, whether or not he can do the job. So, Langford has been exceptional. I think I reckon the other positive I'd probably take out of it this year, and again, I thought they were okay on Saturday night, was our defence. I get that Amadi got hold of us, and Papley kicked a couple, but again, there just wasn't that midfield pressure. And so I don't know how much football you've played, Grizz, but if you're a defender and there's no midfield pressure, it is the shittest place on the ground to be. And I thought they were admirable again.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Just on Langford, I feel like Bunk's not on an island there saying Langford's going to be a good forward. I feel like half the board was saying that basically the entire time.
That's what I said. Yeah,
it's
probably a dozen or 2 posters that could bump. I mean, I think I've got posts there that I could have bumped easily.
But like it goes to, and I think we'll talk about this later about the forward balance. I don't think it's that far off. I just think, anyway, we'll get that in a minute. In terms of what you said about the defenders, I would hate to play fullbacks and halfback, back pocket, whatever it is for Essendon at the moment, because we haven't been able to. So all year we have been the worst team in the competition at allowing opposition teams to go from D50 into forward 50. So from our forward 50 into our D50. What has changed really since the bye, where we've won 1 out of 6 games? We're 1-6 and we beat Adelaide by 3 goals, right? So we haven't been good since the bye. But what's happened is that the quality of entries that we're conceding are worse than they were when we were winning games. And that's because teams have figured out our zone. And I think you mentioned this on the board, so I'm not going to steal your thunder so much, but the type of entries teams are getting are far deeper and exposing our defenders 1v1. And when we do win it back, the poor defenders win it back in the back pocket and there's no movement up the field. So that transition game we had going is, really struggling. And when you lose Jordan Ridley, who's arguably the best kick in the team, that was always going to happen as well. But
that's not arguable. That's not arguable at all. He's definitely the best kick in our team.
Zach Merritt could make an argument, but we'll save that argument for another time. But you're at a position now where the defenders are getting the ball deeper and they can't transition it. So the ball, it's becoming repeat entries and repeat inside 50s, and they're shallow rebounds. Whereas I think earlier in the year, we we're putting enough pressure up the field, like you said, so that the ball was getting kicked inside 50 shallow, and we were bouncing outside basically from the top of the D50. But I'll defer to you here because you made a really interesting point, which I really agree with, about our zone and how teams are just kicking short at the moment. And I noticed it watching really the last 4 weeks, but I'll let you explain it because I don't want to steal your thunder.
Yeah, so it's something you might remember I mentioned it with the Carlton game when I was talking about Nick Martin's defensive efforts and that he just got pushed back. He was just pushing back to space and sort of forgot to man up on his opponent, and then he picked that up for the rest of the game. So it's something I've noticed that it's sort of a bit of a trend in that we're really good at pushing back and covering space, but it's almost like we forget that we've got direct opponents. So what happens then is we push back in up space. The direct opponent then sits, in front of our zone, and it's a 15, 20 meter kick on a 45 or even a 90-degree angle. The kick comes, we then have to push up to man the mark. They then open the zone up and away we go. And it's just something that we're going, that's the next level of our defense. So I think last year under Truck, we tried to go man on man and it just fell apart horrendously. So Brad Scott's come in and gone, look, we're going to set up this zone and this zone is going to cover the ground and we're going to cover the ground better with the zone. And it's worked really well. The problem is he now needs to get the playing group to the next level, which is where Truck was trying to get us to go to with this man-on-man style stuff. So you have your zone, but then when your zone breaks down, you're able to reset and go man-on-man and actually shut it down that way. And we haven't been able to do the next step. So Brad this year has obviously come in. He's come in and gone at a slower approach to Truck. I think him and Truck, end result, we were hoping for the same thing. It's just he's gone a different approach. And it's looked all right at the start of the year because teams were a little bit surprised by the fact that we're no longer playing this man-on-man and our zone's been really good and we cover the ground really well. But now they've sort of realised, okay, what you do against Essendon is you don't press, you don't go hard. What you do is you get your ball, take your 45-degree kick, you do that 2 or 3 times, and then the zone breaks down, and then you go, and then you rip through them, and then unfortunately, Zerk Thatcher and Laverde and Ridley when he was playing and everybody else down there gets slaughtered because this zone that's meant to be back there helping them fill the space is no longer filling the space because they've all pushed up to man the mark or, they've all pushed up to push pressure on the ball carrier further up the ground. And the thing is, I actually don't know what the answer to that is because it's very tricky to switch from a zone to a man-on-man. And the good sides do it. Yeah. And are we a good side? Can we do it? Because so far, every time it's been asked of us to do it, we haven't been able to. It's not a preseason in under the belts probably changes that, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's actually partly yes, just it's a new system. And anytime you bring a new system, it's hard to implement perfectly. But the other thing I think we lack is speed in our forward half. So we have so many guys, when the balls are intercepted on the wing or halfback, they get caught in no man's land, right? So that they're not pushing up onto the mark and they're not really back in the zone position and they're not quick enough to recover. Like Will Snelling, even Matt Guelphy, even like a Jai Menzies, who we all like, they're not super quick players. They're good in short and intermediate areas in closing down space, but they're not fast over 20, 30 meters, what's required to basically set up a zone quickly into close space in a zone. And so there's a bunch of players, and Peter Wright's the same. I think since we've gone 2 rucks and Peter Wright and Kyle Langford and Jake Stringer before last week, we were a bit tall up forward and we just weren't able to have the speed, particularly forward to center, to set the zone up fast enough. And I think once that we realised that, particularly against the Bulldogs and Geelong, the zone was getting set up further and further back. And so that's what I meant by like the inside 50s were conceding, we're getting deeper and deeper because we're basically doing a semi-flood back into defensive 50. But then we weren't fast enough on the offense to get it out and to get that rebound. And when you're starting so deep, it's really hard to get that ball moving. And I don't know whether it's a symptom of just playing really good teams as well. Like we've played, I think it's Port Adelaide, and Adelaide just pumped Port Adelaide. Port Adelaide's top 4. Geelong, reigning premier in Geelong, and Western Bulldogs, who generally clip us anyway. So we've played some decent teams, and they've really given us a clip. And I think that rolls bonds into our next part of the pod. Is there any other positive? Zach Merritt was industrious as ever, but a bit of a lone hand. Any other positives before we move on to the big questions for the rest of the year?
Oh, yeah, there's another positive I want to raise right now, and it's got
Sure, go
nothing to do
ahead.
with Essendon, and that is the Matildas have gone 1-0 up in their knockout game against, which is essentially a knockout game against Canada in the World Cup. So,
And for those
yeah, Haley Razzo put one in, so we'll take the lead anyway.
and for anyone that was wondering when we're recording, we're obviously recording on a Monday night. So well, I wanted to chat less about the last game because we all watched it. We all got heartbroken by the ending. I wanted to talk about the rest of 2023. And really, the first question I wanted to ask, and I'll give you the new ball. Bonds, has the last 3 weeks, which has been even called the last 4 or 5 weeks with the loss against Port and the game against Adelaide, has the last 3 weeks been below our best, or has it been a reality check? Like, is this just who we are, or has this been, poor and below our best in our standards?
So it's a tough one, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
we started the season with such promise. It was promise that sort of came from nowhere. I think last year, Rowan Connolly got stuck in you and me about the fact that we were so negative in our predictions, and then our predictions this year weren't much better.
We were right last year, by the way, Rowan Connolly, if you're listening. But that's all right. Move on.
Yeah, and I think we were probably still right this year in that we sort of said we were probably in that bottom echelon of teams, and I think maybe we still are, and we've just jagged a couple of wins that maybe we shouldn't have.
Yep.
But I said after the Geelong game on the board that the Geelong game was incredibly frustrating, and then the Bulldogs game was the same, and the Swans game was also again incredibly frustrating. And the losses do start to build up, and as a supporter, they start to hit the mindset, and they start to really make you think about what's going on, and you start getting a bit more negative. But the reality is, the losses don't undo the good work earlier in the year. Regardless of what anyone says, we showed earlier in the year that we could beat Melbourne, who are still a bloody good side. We ran Collingwood close, we ran Port Adelaide close twice. And yeah, okay, that's brave losses, and I'm sick of brave losses. And I get that I'm sort of contradicting myself a little bit, but we still did it. So the 3 losses we've had recently don't change that fact. Do they take some of the shine off it? They absolutely do, because the season isn't going to end the way that we thought it was probably going to maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago. But that still doesn't mean that we've had a shit season throughout the whole time. It's just the next step is being able to play like we did in the first half of the year, the whole year, and against all the sides, especially Geelong, because fuck me dead, I'm sick of turning up and just not being able to watch the game after quarter time because it's already dead.
So you think the last 3 weeks has been below our best as opposed to a reality check?
It's probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I think probably earlier in the year, we probably played above our best a little bit.
Yep.
And I think now we're probably playing below our best by about the same that we played above our best. So,
Yeah.
I think if you average it out, we've probably played where we should have for most of the year. It's just that at different times we've played above and below.
Yeah. I tend to think it's a reality check. Personally, I just think I'm going to jump onto the back of what you said about sick of getting smacked by Geelong every time we play them. I'm sick of getting smacked by Western Bulldogs every time we play them. I'm sick of losing to Collingwood in a similar way every freaking Anzac Day. I'm sick of getting pumped by Brisbane. And the 2 losses against Port Adelaide were fine. But again, we really should have beaten Port Adelaide, but we lost because our end of game situational awareness wasn't on. And I could just tell the way that last minute was set up that we we're going to lose it. But this is too consistent for it to be below our best. This is a reality check. The good teams touch us up, with the exception of Melbourne, in a weird sort of round of football, which was not Magic Round or whatever the AFL's rebranded it from the NRL, gather round. Otherwise, the good teams that always touch us up have touched us up. This is a reality check. We snared a good win against Richmond. Great. Richmond aren't in the 8, and then we went on and beat Carlton, who was doing terribly, West Coast and North Melbourne, and only just beat North. So I tend to think, I've been saying all year that we're not as good as we look. A lot of people saying, we might be contenders in a couple of years. We're a long way off that. And I think this has been the reality check we needed. Moving that on to the next question, and I'll ask you again, new ball. Considering where we are now, we're outside the 8. We haven't got a great percentage, 9 wins. We probably need to win both North Melbourne and West Coast by a lot and then one of Collingwood or GWS, and GWS have won 7 straight. They're running red hot and probably have to rely on other results to make the finals. What should be the priority this year? Should it be blooding young kids that we haven't yet, guys like Boss and Wanganeen and Baldwin and just D'Ambrosio when he's back fit, who haven't been able to get a run? Or do you think it's important to try gun and get those sort of 3 wins required to make the finals? What should be the priority this year?
It's funny you mentioned, because it's actually another post I actually made earlier in the week in the Brad Scott coach thread. And by the way, David Warner just got out, so fuck me, bloody England are going to roll us, aren't they? Anyway, so I actually said in the Brad Scott thread earlier in the week that if we lost on Saturday night, for me, the chase for finals was over. It'd be lovely if we got there as a byproduct, but I think you look at it now and go, finals for us is probably done because our percentage isn't great, which is probably sort of backs up your point a little bit with our percentage being so low, despite the fact we've had so many wins. And the issue then becomes, well, what, as you've said, as you've asked, what do we do? You know, if finals are gone, what do you do? And I said in the Brad Scott thread last Friday, you know, this club has a long history of backing players in. So we back our players in. You know, the Angus Monfreys, the Henry Slatterys, I'm probably being harsh on Monfreys there, but you know what I mean. You know where I'm coming from. The players that are decent but are probably never going to take us that next step, we just keep backing them in again and again and again because we're always chasing that final spot. But the reality, as I said, I think the finals is gone. So at that point, when it's gone, you need to start throwing your fringe players in. So you need to be able to see what these players have got. So you know your Vosses and as you said, your Baldwins and your Rhett Montgomerys and all these sort of guys. You at some point, you know, you need to actually see what they've got, because it's all well and good to say, for example, for a Patrick Voss to say, oh, he's been okay at VFL level, but he hasn't set the world on fire. Look at the midfield that's giving him the ball compared to what he'd get at the AFL level. I mean, we've got no idea. He could turn up at the AFL level and have, you know, Zach Merritt and Mason Redmond and Jordan Ridley and all these other guys who can actually hit targets. Maybe even your favourite player in Darcy Parish.
Oh.
Hit it. You know what I mean? Like, the quality of delivery he would get at AFL level is much better. But we don't know if that's going to make any difference to him because we haven't seen that yet. You know, same with Montgomery at the other end. The backline he'll have around him at AFL level is much better supporting cast. Yes, he'll have a much better opponent than he gets at VFL level, but we don't know what he's going to look like when he's surrounded by AFL quality players.
Yeah.
And we've missed that in the past. So, you know, I know I banged on him when he was at the club, but Tom Hurd, you know, we never saw what Tom Hurd could do. We never really saw what, you know, Dean Wallace's son could do.
Yep.
Yeah, Tom Wallace, sorry. You know, could he have been a gun? We don't know. Going back years, Dylan Van Unen, I think it was, you know, we never saw, like,
yeah, so I think
we started to try those guys. So, yeah.
I think I understand your point, and I think my point's going to piggyback off that when I say that we have a list spot crunch at the end of the year. So we've got a lot of guys. We have got not a lot of obvious guys coming out of contract that you would want to move on. We've got a lot of rookies, a lot of untried guys, and a lot of guys on big money, like Darcy Parish, who, you know, everyone said he's my favorite player, but I'm not getting into that argument now. Actually, I'm sick of talking about him. But like, dead set. I've lost my train of thought. You've triggered me. But so we've got a lot of guys that are just untried. So we've got Patrick Voss out of contract, Rhett Montgomery, Massimo D'Ambrosio, Anthony Tupinwudi, all these players. At some point, there has to be some level of exploration as to who they are. Don't tell me Patrick Voss wouldn't have taken half of the marks that Peter Wright dropped against Sydney on the weekend. Now, I'm not saying we have to drop Wright for him, but it goes to your point of, you know, if he got the delivery that some of our players are getting that aren't making the most of it, then let's see what. And if he doesn't cut it, then great, we know what we have, which is a list spot at the end of the year. Same thing with Massimo D'Ambrosio, who's out of contract. You know what? Ridley's out. We know exactly what Nick Hines is going to give us. We know exactly what Jake Kelly's going to give us. We know exactly what Dyson Heppel's going to give us. We have no illusions as to what they're going to do if they're on our list next year. We have no idea what Massimo D'Ambrosio might turn into if we give him 3-4 weeks off halfback. And we can't make educated decisions at the end of this year without that. And the bigger thing for me is West Coast and North Melbourne the next 2 weeks. If you're going to throw a young player into the team to see what he's got, this is the 2 weeks to do it. Don't wait until we're fighting for our lives against GWS and Collingwood and the heat's too hot and it's an impossible situation for a first gamer to come into. Give them 2 games now. If they don't work, go back to Old Faithful for GWS and Collingwood. But don't get to the end of the year not knowing who they are. It's a waste of our time. And Brad Scott, I think he got confused. He was said today, we're not going to sacrifice the short term for the long term. We're disappointed that we might not make finals, but we're building something bigger. So he's contradicted himself. I think he meant we're not going to sacrifice the long term for the short term. But that's just what the next 2 weeks has to be. Elijah Sardis, what have you got? We're not going to delist you in at the end of the year, but give us a lift. I don't know. Sorry. Rant over.
Yeah, and the thing is, right, that then means obviously fans need to be patient.
Yeah,
and that's that's the biggest part of the problem I think that we've had at this club for a while is fans just aren't patient. So we play all these kids, which I think we should, and by some miracle, either West Coast or North Melbourne beats us. Brad Scott, they'll be calling for his head. There'll be people literally out there calling for his head because we lost to one of those 2 teams. I would cop a loss against one of those sides if we were to fill the team with kids.
Well, North almost beat us earlier in the year, with basically midfield firing. They had basically their entire midfield missing, and they almost beat us. It took a mass goal in the last quarter to seal it. So, if North Melbourne roll over and kick our butts in 2 weeks' time, and we're blooding kids, who's to be surprised? I don't know. Anyway, we'll move on to this week. So we're playing West Coast in Melbourne at Etihad, which has not been a happy hunting ground for the West Coast Eagles this year. They got belted by Carlton by about 90 points by half time 2 weeks ago. They're fresh off a big win. When I say big, I mean it's a win, so it's big for West Coast. But against North Melbourne.
They played against North, who are tanking.
Yeah.
There's no way North lose to that side if they're not trying to drop games.
Yeah, and I tend to be glad that they won this week. Hopefully the edge is taken off next week. They pack it in for the trip to Melbourne like they have all season. But if we're any serious as a football club, we'll win this game. And I think if we don't go the kids, which we're saying we should, if we don't, then this should be a 10-goal win. And we really need to be starting to build back some percentage.
Yeah, well, we absolutely will. I mean, we need all the percentage we can get. So the thing is, right, if we win the next 2 weeks, build up the confidence, knock off GWS, all of a sudden the finals back on the table. I don't think we should be chasing them, but I can see that the club may do that because Gary O'Donnell said it on the podcast, 4 weeks ago, and I tend to agree with him that if we don't make finals this year, considering where we were, it's probably a failure because we probably should have, even though at the start of the year we didn't think we should.
Yeah. I'm a bit more flexible on that. I look at the season in its entirety. I had us at 10 wins this year. I had us at 9 to 10 wins this year, and we're at 9 now. So, actually, no, I'm looking back. I'm 8 to 9. So we're already at what I expected. So it's a positive as far as I'm concerned. But I understand your point.
Matilda's a 2-0 up, Grizz. We're going through the knockout stages. I'm calling it early.
All right. Well, at least it's going better than the cricket. But but yeah, I tend to think that regardless of what finals or not for this week, this is must win. West Coast, I'm looking at, I watched their game against North Melbourne. They did everything they could to lose that game. That was so bad. They had almost 70 more disposals than North Melbourne did. The quality of game in general was pretty low, but I'm hoping that we see at least 2 or 3 changes to this team. I would like to see Sartis given a run. I'd like to see Voss given a run. And I would like to see one of the ruckmen go and just play sort of Peter Wright as the second ruck. And then if Mass is fit, play him. But I think he may have picked up a corky, so he may be out. What are you looking for this week?
Well, I'm going this week, which will be the second game I've been to. The other one I went to, of course, was, I think I mentioned it, was the Carlton game. So I'm looking for a win, which would be nice because it's been very rare that I've been able to go to games and had 100% success rate. I think I've picked my games well this year for that though. I'm probably looking at Zerk Thatcher to maybe do a bit of a job on West Coast. I think his intercept marking has probably been underrated a little bit. Matilda's second goal just got ruled out. Anyway,
Elijah's out too, so 2-0 down.
Oh fuck! Jeez, this is going horribly. It's all falling apart.
This is a football podcast. Back to football. Sorry.
Back to football. So Zerk Thatcher, his intercept marking, I think, has been underrated this year. I thought he'd done really well for that. He's been beaten one-on-one a few times, and a couple of players got hold of him. And I think Oscar Allen could probably do that.
He did it early in the year. I think Oscar Allen kicked 4. So Zerk will be looking to square up, I think. Yeah,
so it's the same thing that we sort of mentioned, or I sort of mentioned on the board back before the Geelong game. Unfortunately, he didn't square up against Hawkins, but I don't think that was his fault. I think that was just the fact that our midfield just shit themselves against Geelong for whatever reason. So I think I'm looking at him this week to probably have a big game, and that's what I'd like to see. And I would like to see a zone set up defensively that doesn't fall apart once the opposition starts chipping the ball around. But I don't think I'm going to see that this week because I don't think West Coast have the ability to chip around successfully, and B, Brad Scott's not going to fix it overnight.
Yep, no, West Coast will win by blood and force trauma if they do. They will win because their midfield gets on top, which they shouldn't because their midfield is not that good at the moment. But, this is where you hope to see players like Merritt and Parrish and Caldwell and Hobbs really cash in. Like, they beat Sydney pretty comprehensively in the contested possession and clearances on the weekend and didn't make the most of it. So, you're
the 2-0's back. We're back. Sorry.
Look, this stopped being about football about 5 minutes ago, didn't it? So we'll probably call it there. Just your quick tip and a crazy prediction for this week, Bonds.
I think we'll probably win by 10 goals, and let's say Scott goes nuts and goes full sheedy in the last quarter, switches him around, and Zerk kicks 3.
Zerk kicks 3. Oh wow, it would be party time if Zerk kicks 3. All right, I'm probably going us by 6 goals. I think Langford will kick 6. He'll top his career best, which will be fun to watch. So thank you everyone for your patience for the last 3 weeks, and thank you for listening today. Bond, thanks for jumping on.
That's all right. I hope everyone enjoyed my updates on the soccer and the cricket. I'm sure they'll be much appreciated.
Yeah, I'm sure they wouldn't have known the scores by the time this podcast is produced. So they'll be glad to know from us. But that will wrap us up for tonight. Thank you for listening. Make sure you like, subscribe, and tell your Bombers supporting mates. Go Bombers this week. Let's go for a win.